Welcome to Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda. My name is Nick Park and I'm taking us through a series of messages on the great prayers of the Old Testament. And we're seeing how God led his people in prayer, taught them lessons in prayer, schooled them in the school of prayer, and brought them into a place of deeper intimacy with himself. And our prayer is that through these lessons, we will also draw deeper and closer to God in prayer. And we've now reached David, and in 2 Samuel chapter 7, you have the account of where David had brought the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem. And David, he doesn't want the Ark of the Covenant to dwell within a tent, a tabernacle. He wants to build a house, to build a temple for it. And he says about it to Nathan the prophet, and Nathan says, "Hey, you're the king, go for it, king." And God spoke to Nathan that night, and Nathan came back to the king and said, "You know what? God said you're not to build the house." And then we find David praying. And when David prayed, you see this prayer because David had wanted to build a house for the Lord, but the Lord said, "No, David, I'm going to build a house for you." When I say a house, the house of David was not a building. The house of David was his family, his line, his descent, through which, of course, Jesus Christ was going to come. And that's where God was going with David. David wanted to build a fine temple that for generations to come, people would look at it and say, "Wow, look at the temple of David. Isn't it wonderful? What a mighty king he must have been." But God wanted to use David to create a house, a family of his own, through which would eventually come Jesus Christ, that people would not look and say, "Wow, how wonderful David is." They would say, "How wonderful Jesus is." And we see David accepting that, and he says, in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 18, he says, "Who am I, sovereign Lord, and what is my family that you have brought me this far? And if this were not enough in your sight, O sovereign Lord, you have also spoken about the future of the house of your servant. Is this your usual way of dealing with man, O sovereign Lord? What more can David say to you? For you know your servant, O sovereign Lord. For the sake of your word and according to your will, you have done this great thing and made it known to your servant." And he keeps on praying along the same line, that he is totally 100% committed to one thing above all else, and that is that his house will be built after him, his descendants, that God is going to move through. And David realized that God building a house, a family line for him, was far more important than David building a house for God. We live in a day where people want to leave monuments to themselves. They want to be remembered by statues. They want buildings to be named after them. They pay to have their plaques put on tables and chairs in churches that their name will be remembered for future generation. Even, sadly to say, even sometimes pastors want to build fine, magnificent buildings that people will remember it as the building that pastor built. But God has something greater in store for us. Why? Because God's ways are not our ways, and his thoughts are not our thoughts, but they're not less than our thoughts or our ways. They are higher. His ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And God has something much better for us than we could ever dream of. The best that David could dream of was to build a house for the Lord. But God said, "I've got something better for you. I'm going to build a house for you. And through one of your descendants, all the nations on earth are going to be blessed." You know, you might be ambitious. You might be ambitious to do great things. But I believe that when you come into that place of prayer and listen to God, God will say, "I've got something much bigger and much better for you, because I want to use you to do something of eternal value for me. Not to leave a monument on earth, but to build something that will last for eternity." May God help us to catch those great purposes of God in Jesus' name. And thank you for joining us today, and join us again next time for another Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda.